Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another deep dive. We like to get into the nitty-gritty of things here, so today we're going to take a swing at something close to my heart baseball.
Ah, yes, America's pastime.
Precisely. But what is it about this sport that makes it so enduring? Why do so many of us, myself included, have this deep connection to baseball?
Well, we've got a fantastic guide to help us answer those very questions. We're going to be taking a look at Why We Love Baseball, A History in 50 Moments by Joe Posnanski, one of the best sports writers out there today.
Yeah, Poznanski's insights into this sport are just on another level.
Agreed. One thing that really struck me is how he argues that our memories of baseball are different from other things we love.
Different how?
Well, like, let's say music.
Okay.
We might have very powerful memories tied to our favorite songs or bands, but Poznanski says those are different from our baseball memories, which are intensely personal, almost physically vivid. You know what? I think he's right. When I think about baseball, I don't just remember the games. I remember the smells, like hot dogs at the ballpark, the feeling of a worn leather mitt.
Exactly. Like you're transported back in time.
Absolutely. Poznanski makes this point using baseball cards.
Oh, yeah, those little pieces of cardboard. They become like these time capsules, packed with nostalgia. It's not just about the stats or the players pictured on them. It's the whole experience they represent.
Oh, for sure. And that's what makes them so powerful. I still have shoeboxes full of those cards from when I was a kid. The thrill of finding a rare one or building forts out of them. Yeah, it was a whole world contained in those flimsy pieces of cardboard.
They're not just cardboard, though, are they?
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's your childhood. And I'm betting some of you listening can relate to that. What about you? Do you have an early baseball memory that really takes you back?
I do. But I think what's even more fascinating is how baseball's impact stretches way beyond these personal memories. You see, baseball has been around for centuries, all the way back to the 1700s.
Wow, so its history is deeply intertwined with American history.
It is. And because of that, it acts as a mirror reflecting how American society has evolved. And here's the thing, it grappled with things like racial segregation and players' rights, often before the wider culture did.
You're right. Baseball wasn't just playing catch up, it was pushing boundaries.
Exactly.
Like with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in 1947.
Huge moment.
Huge. It's not just a sports milestone.
Right.
It's a landmark moment for civil rights in America. And even looking at how baseball stadiums are designed shows how the game has evolved.
Like Fenway Park and the Green Monster. It's more than just a quirky landmark. It changed how the game is played there. It gave a real advantage to certain hitters.
So you can actually see history built into the walls of those stadiums.
You can.
And speaking of moments that are built into baseball legend, how can we not talk about Babe Ruth's called shot? Picture this. It's the 1932 World Series. Tensions are high. The Cubs are heckling Ruth mercilessly, and he's got two strikes against him. Legend has it that he points to center field, like he's predicting where he's going to hit the ball.
And then boom, he nails it. Longest home run anyone had seen at Wrigley, right to the spot he supposedly pointed to.
It's just pure baseball magic, isn't it?
It really is.
But of course, there's that debate. Did he actually call it, or was he just gesturing? But that kind of adds to the mystique, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does.
It's like fact and myth all rolled into one.
I mean, that's part of baseball's charm. But called shot or not, the impact of that moment is undeniable.
For sure.
And beyond that, Babe Ruth really transformed the whole game.
He did. He pretty much single-handedly ended the dead ball era,
Yeah.
Where home runs were rare. It's like the game underwent this huge shift, and I'm curious what made that kind of power hitting possible so suddenly. Was it just Ruth's incredible talent?
Well, it was a combination of things. For starters, they began manufacturing baseballs differently. These livelier balls traveled much farther. Then you have stadium designs coming into play.
How so?
Well, smaller parks started adding bleachers, making hitting home runs more feasible.
Mm.
And perhaps most surprising was that around the same time, they outlawed the spitball.
The spitball. Okay, I know it's illegal now, but what exactly is it?
Picture this. A pitcher doctoring the ball with spit, Vaseline, even scratching it up to make it move in really unpredictable ways.
So basically like a supercharged curveball.
Yeah, pretty much. It gave pitchers a massive advantage, and it was actually so dangerous they banned it in 1920 after a player died from being hit in the head by one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So pitchers who kept using it after that were basically bending the rules.
Like Gaylord Perry, who was famous for his hard slider.
Exactly. And his daughter would always joke about it, say, no, it's a hard slider, whenever people questioned her dad's pitching.
So it's like an open secret.
Yeah. But Barry had this incredible coincidence in his career, you see. He hit his first and only home run on a very special day.
Wait a minute, are we talking about July 20th, 1969?
Yeah. 34 minutes after the Apollo 11 moon landing.
Yeah.
Talk about a story to tell at parties.
That's amazing. Baseball intercepting with these massive moments in history. And, speaking of moments that changed history, we have to go back to Jackie Robinson and his relationship with teammate Pee Wee Reese. There's that iconic image, you've probably seen it, of Reese putting his arm around Robinson during a game in 1947. In the midst of all this racial hostility, it's become this powerful symbol of solidarity.
It has. But like many stories, there's some debate about how it actually went down. Did it happen exactly as we picture it? Some people, like Ken Burns, have pointed out that there was almost no coverage of this moment in black newspapers at the time. Makes you wonder if it's been embellished over the years.
So are we saying the whole thing was made up?
No, not necessarily. Poznanski actually has a really nuanced take on it. He suggests that some kind of gesture of support likely happened, perhaps not as dramatic as we imagine it, maybe directed at the opposing players rather than the crowd. The point is, Jackie Robinson himself always said Pee Wee Reese's friendship was genuine, and it made a world of difference for him.
That's a good point. It reminds us that even in these legendary baseball stories, it's those human connections that really resonate.
Speaking of courage and human connections, did you know that Joe Poznanski actually knew Buck O'Neil?
Negro League's legend.
The one and only.
And the first black coach in Major League Baseball. Wow, that's incredible.
It is. And his story is one of amazing resilience. He faced unimaginable discrimination, but he always remains so graceful.
It's hard to fathom denied entry to high school just because of his race.
But Poznanski emphasizes how Buck O'Neil never became bitter. Instead, he dedicated himself to advocating for the Negro Leagues and the players whose contributions were often overlooked. He had this amazing quote that I think really sums up his perspective. He said, "We always celebrate the people who crossed the bridge, but here we celebrate the people who built the bridge."
Beautiful, just beautiful. It's about honoring those who paved the way rather than dwelling on the injustices they endured.
Exactly. And there's this really poignant part of his story. He was finally inducted into the Hall of Fame, but sadly, it happened after he passed away.
Oh, wow. Sometimes recognition comes too late.
All this talk of the Hall of Fame has got me thinking about the process itself. I mean, sports writers like Poznanski have the power to vote players into the Hall of Fame. That's got to be a tough job. You need 75% of the vote to get in, and it's led to some pretty heated debates, especially about players from the steroid era. The steroid era.
Right.
It's a real ethical dilemma. On one hand, you've got players like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Mark McGwire. Their numbers are incredible, but their legacies are tainted by allegations of cheating.
Right. So it makes you wonder what matters more. Raw
Yeah.
talent and those record-breaking stats, or playing the game fairly and on a level playing field. It's a tough one. What do you think? As a baseball fan, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, it's a tough one, for sure. I mean, you can't deny that those guys were some of the most exciting players to watch, breaking records left and right. But yeah, there's that shadow of doubt.
Did they actually achieve all that legitimately?
Right. And if they didn't, does it kind of taint the whole thing?
Makes you think about what it means to be a fan.
Definitely. And it's interesting because baseball, unlike a lot of other sports, has this obsession with statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's always been about keeping track of every hit, every strikeout.
Meticulous records going all the way back to the beginning.
Exactly. The game of inches, fractions of a second, all meticulously recorded over a century. So when those numbers are potentially skewed, even if it's just a perception, it really shakes things up.
It does. And to make things even more complex, Poznanski is actually one of the people who votes on who makes it into the Hall of Fame. So he's got this front row seat to the whole steroid era dilemma.
He does. It's not just theoretical for him. He's actually shaping how baseball history is written.
Exactly. So I'm curious, how does he approach this in the book?
Well, he doesn't offer any easy answers.
Mm-hmm.
He acknowledges the anger a lot of fans felt, that sense of betrayal, but he also wants us to think about the context. The pressure these guys were under to perform, that win at all costs mentality that was so prevalent back then.
Yeah. When all that steroid stuff came out, it definitely changed how I felt about the game and some of the players I used to look up to.
I think that's a common reaction.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront our ideas about heroes.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, it also makes baseball more human, right? Well, because we see ourselves with all our flaws and imperfections reflected in these players, their struggles, their triumphs.
It reminds us that it's not just about the numbers on a stat sheet. It's about the stories behind those numbers, the personalities, those moments that transcend the game itself.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And speaking of stories, let's circle back to Jackie Robinson for a moment.
Okay.
We touched on his breaking the color barrier, but I think it's worth really unpacking the impact of that event, not just for baseball, but for America.
Absolutely. I mean, the courage it took for him to step onto that field amidst all that racism and hostility, it's almost unimaginable.
It really is. And you know what's incredible is how relevant his story still is today.
It is.
All these years later, it shows how baseball can be this platform for social change, reflecting our country's ongoing struggle with racial equality. Makes you think about how far we've come and how far we still have to go.
And it's a good reminder that progress isn't always linear. You know, there are setbacks, there's resistance. The fight for a more just world in baseball and beyond, it never really ends.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
Which brings us to this question that Poznanski asks, and it really stuck with me. He asks if baseball is this mirror reflecting American history and values in baseball. What does the current state of the game tell us about where we are as a nation today?
Whoa, that's a really good question. What kind of changes in baseball do you think might be hinting at larger trends?
Well, one of the most obvious shifts is this increasing focus on data and analytics, what some people call the Moneyball approach, where teams use statistics and algorithms to evaluate players and build their rosters.
Yeah, like in the movie Moneyball.
Exactly.
It's a great movie, by the way. For those who haven't seen it, it's about how the Oakland A's used this data-driven approach to compete with teams that had much larger budgets. They found undervalued players that other teams overlooked. It's a fascinating story, but it does make you wonder, is all this data making the game less exciting for fans?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a microcosm of a trend we're seeing everywhere. Data is influencing everything.
Yeah.
But in baseball, some people worry that it's sucking the soul out of the game, taking away from the spontaneity, the magic.
I love those unpredictable moments, those gutsy plays that defy the stats. I wouldn't want to lose that. It's like we're trading stories for spreadsheets.
That's the risk. But, some argue that analytics are actually adding a new layer of complexity and understanding.
Sure.
It's not about replacing human intuition. It's about enhancing it.
So it's like we're getting a peek behind the curtain, seeing how the game is played at a deeper level.
Right. And there are other changes in baseball that reflect broader societal trends. For example, the game is becoming much more international.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You're seeing players from all over the world making their mark in the major leagues.
That's a great point. It really reflects how interconnected the world has become. National boundaries are becoming less important, and baseball is becoming this global melting pot of talent and styles.
Exactly. And it's enriching the game. It really challenges that idea of baseball being just an American pastime.
It does. It pushes us to think outside our own borders and appreciate the diversity of the game.
Couldn't agree more. And we can't talk about changes in baseball without talking about technology.
True.
Think about things like instant replay, pitch tracking systems. It's transforming how we watch, analyze, even officiate the game.
It's definitely making things more precise, more accountable, but it also raises some new ethical questions, like how much should we rely on technology to make the calls? Do we want perfect accuracy, even if it means losing that human element of umpiring?
Right. And what about things like virtual reality or augmented reality? Are those going to enhance the fan experience or create this weird disconnect between the real game and the digital version?
Interesting questions. It seems like baseball, like the rest of society, is grappling with how to integrate technology in a way that preserves the heart of the game.
It is. Yeah. And these are the kinds of questions that are going to shape the future of the sport. So I'm curious, what does Poznanski have to say about all this? Where does he stand on the role of technology in baseball?
Yeah.
Is he a technophobe? A tech enthusiast?
Like, fill us in.
I'd say he's cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
He acknowledges the benefits,
Yeah.
but he's also wary of losing sight of what makes baseball special.
That human drama, the unpredictability, the emotional connection between players and fans. It's
Exactly.
about striking that balance.
Yeah, and embracing innovation without sacrificing the soul of the game.
Right.
And this leads to what I think is the most provocative question that Poznanski raises in the entire book. He asks, what will baseball look like 50 years from now? Will it still have the same cultural significance? Will it adapt to a changing world, new technologies, and demographics?
Wow. That's a huge question, one that I think every fan, every player, everyone involved in the game should be asking themselves.
They should.
Because ultimately, the future of baseball is in our hands. We get to decide what kind of game we want to pass on to the next generation.
And this conversation has really got me thinking about my own relationship with baseball, how it's changed over the years.
Me too. And we've covered so much, from personal memories to these big historical moments, and even looking ahead at where the game is going.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has. And before we wrap up, there's this one idea from Poznanski that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's bigger than just baseball, but he uses the game to look at America as a whole.
Interesting.
We've talked about how baseball has reflected American society dealing with racism, labor rights, and now the impact of technology and all that.
Right.
But what if the challenges baseball is facing right now are actually signs of bigger struggles America is going through?
That's a thought-provoking idea. Like, if we look at baseball as this microcosm of America, what do we see? We're in this time of rapid change, information overload, and we're always questioning what's real.
Exactly. It's like that whole fake news debate is playing out on the baseball field. You've got algorithms telling you which players are valuable, instant replay, second-guessing human umpires.
And a generation of fans who might be more interested in their phones than the actual game.
Right.
It's like this tug of war between tradition and innovation that romanticized past and this data-driven present. It's everywhere in baseball.
Totally. Some people holding on to the old ways, others embracing the new. It's like, who's right?
And that's the thing. There's no easy answer.
And maybe that's what makes baseball so compelling. It's not just about wins and losses. It's about the stories we tell, the memories we make, feeling connected to something bigger than ourselves.
And those stories are always evolving, being passed down through generations.
Mhm.
So the next time you're watching a game, I want you to think about it as more than just entertainment.
Okay.
Think about it as a reflection of us.
As a nation.
Yeah. What are our values? What are our worries? What are we holding on to and what are we letting go of? Baseball, with its history and its challenges, might give us some answers.
I love that. And of course, we've only just scratched the surface here. If you want to dive deeper, Joe Posnanski's Why We Love Baseball is a fantastic read. I highly recommend it.
I second that.
And who knows, maybe your own baseball story, your connection to the game, will lead you to some answers, too. That's it for this deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the love of the game alive.